Democrats, as we've been telling you, are on the run with regard to the SAVE Act and with regard to voter ID. In fact, one of them was literally on the run. I mean, she was chased down by a reporter. That would be Elizabeth Warren. And then, when finally confronted with the question of voter ID, she had a meltdown. And she stammered and sputtered. I love it when Pocahontas does that. And ultimately lied to you about photo ID and about getting the right documentation to prove that you're a citizen. I'll show you that clip and break it down for you in just a sec. But let's start with one of the darlings of the Democrat Party, one of the normies, Jon Ossoff. He's running for re-election in Georgia right now. And boy, he is getting rave reviews from all the media and all the Democrats because he's not one of those crazy Democrats. He's a normie. See, they do this every 6 years when they run for re-election in a southern state like Georgia. They act normal. And in his speech, he absolutely likened asking photo ID and proof of citizenship to Jim Crow and sequestering the vote, and this is racist, except there was one problem. At that event, well, here, you'll see.
Critics are calling out Democrat Senator Jon Ossoff for asking campaign event goers to show government ID at the door. There are a lot of pictures of this going on. But he doesn't want to require the same thing for federal elections. And last year, when the SAVE Act passed the House, Ossoff released the statement, quote, "This is a nakedly partisan, totally unworkable, bad faith bill cynically intended to disenfranchise millions of eligible voters," end of quote. But even that was a switch up from this comment back in 2021.
Are you open to things like voter ID if, in fact, they correct some of the other issues like early voting?
Absolutely. I think it's right and appropriate, and the widely held view of folks in Georgia and across the country, that we need to be able to make sure we're confirming the identity of folks who are participating in elections.
There you go. But now he's got to raise money from the Democratic National Committee and from George Soros and all the other interest groups. So now it's nakedly partisan, it's racist and sexist, I think is the new line that they're using to ask for voter ID. Jon Ossoff, because he's one of the normies. Of course, if you go to his rally, you better have a photo ID or you are out on your ass, my friend. Make it make sense. It doesn't, except to recognize that they're all hypocrites. As you know, this is an 80-20 issue, meaning 80% of Americans think that it's completely reasonable and frankly appropriate and necessary to ask for a photo ID before people vote. So Hakeem Jeffries now having to face the reality that he's on the 20% side of that issue. Well, the only thing he can do to resolve that is to lie.
You said that the SAVE Act is not going to pass the House, but a vast majority of Americans, including 70% of Democrats, do support having voter ID requirements. So are Democrats on the wrong side of an issue with so much support? What's the path forward for Democrats here?
Republicans are clearly on the wrong side of every single issue.
Okay, so 80% of Americans want photo ID. 70% of Democrats, just regular Democrats, not the people who actually hold elected office and power, also want photo ID. So when asked, hey, are you guys on the wrong side? By the way, what a weird question. Are you on the wrong side of this issue? How about the question should be, why are you on the wrong side of this issue? What is compelling you to stay on the wrong side of this issue? Why are you fighting against the majority, vast majority of Americans, including in your own party, who are on the other side of this issue? But no, Hakeem Jeffries' answer is it's the Republicans who are on the wrong side. Because an 80-20 issue in politics, apparently the right side is to be in the minority on the 20% side. Again, all they can do is lie. All they can do is lie. Mike Johnson, he's feeling pretty good about being on his side of the issue. If this is the wrong side, I don't want to be right.
They argued that non-citizens and unregistered individuals don't actually vote. And then we proved that they did, and so then they changed their argument again. Then they argued that the SAVE Act disenfranchises married women who would have to change their last names. That was actually, you remember, that was a whole line of argument. And now, this is their current argument, now Democrats are saying breathlessly that the SAVE Act would result in voter suppression and voter disenfranchisement. It's nonsense. Do you know what actually disenfranchises voters? It's when non-citizens participate in our federal elections and counteract the votes of registered American voters. That's what we have to stop. Democrats have gone so far as to call this the return of Jim Crow laws. That's what you heard Chuck Schumer say, and he just has no shame. It's not the first time Schumer said this. Now, just think of the history of it. In 2021, when Georgia state legislators, when they did it in the state, they passed the election integrity legislation. Chuck Schumer came out, many national Democrats, they called it Jim Crow 2.0.
That's right. And then, of course, after that election, they had a higher turnout amongst all voters, including black voters in Georgia, because, you know, those Jim Crow laws, they're all meant to bring out the black vote or something. Speaker Johnson's dead right on that. I think he's been watching this show. It brings us to Pocahontas. It brings us to Elizabeth Warren, who was chased down by a reporter from Lindell TV, and it did not go well for her. Once again, the theme here, all they can do is lie.
The SAVE Act is expected to be brought this week to the floor for a vote. Do you support voter ID for elections?
Well, it depends on what you mean by voter ID. When you want to say that everyone has to produce a birth certificate, including women whose married names are not on their birth certificates, that creates a real problem for me.
Well, isn't that just one of the first steps in getting married is getting a new ID?
Actually, it's not getting a new birth certificate, because part of what the SAVE Act does is it says most driver's licenses around the country won't work as an ID. And that creates a terrible problem.
But you need an ID to do just about anything in America. Shouldn't you need one to
don't
vote
need
in
a
elections?
birth certificate. I hope you know that.
Thank you.
Oh, the condescension. Oh, so patronizing. That's Elizabeth Warren. Hey, should we break this down with facts? I think we should. Let's do that. Let's start at the beginning and let's see where the truth leads
SAVE
us.
Act is expected to be brought this week to the floor for a vote. Do you support voter ID for elections?
Well, it depends on what you mean by voter ID.
What do you mean it depends on what you mean by voter ID? And by the way, part of the problem here, and it might be because Elizabeth Warren is trying to conflate two issues at once, is the SAVE Act has two fundamental principles to it. And she's smart enough to know that. She's not dumb. I mean, she could be dumb, but she knows this much. Number one, when you register to vote, you have to prove you're a citizen. How do you prove you're a citizen? Well, you know the answer to that. It's the same way you prove you're a citizen when you get a job. You have to fill out an I-9 form. That's federal law, by the way. Federal law, you fill out the I-9 form, and the I-9 form says you need to prove you're a citizen. You've got one piece of documentation from column A that can include a passport or a birth certificate, etc., or two documents over here, one from column B, one from column C. You know this form. I know you do. You've filled it out at least once in your life because you watch this show. Means you've got a job. Now, in column A, you've got passport, birth certificate. There's a couple of other things there, too. If you are a resident, a green card holder, and legally in the country and you can vote, you can fill that out, too. Of course, that won't get you, you can legally work. That's my point. You'd fill that part of the I-9 form out with your green card. Of course, that won't get you the ability to register to vote because you're not a citizen if you're just a green card holder. Over there on the other columns, you can do a combination of your driver's license and a Social Security card and what have you, and just sort of prove that you're a citizen. It's the exact same documentation that the SAVE Act would have you do to register to vote, Now, the second component is the photo ID. That's when you go to vote. Now, if your name's on the voter roll, it means you've already proved your citizenship with that birth certificate or passport or what have you. So now when you check in to vote, all you got to do is prove you are who you say you are with a photo ID. You see, those are two different things. So what's going on here is Elizabeth Warren is purposely trying to conflate these two things, right? So the question was, do you oppose voter ID? And she says, well, it depends on what you mean by voter ID. And then she says this.
When you want to say that everyone has to produce a birth certificate, including women whose married names are not on their birth certificates, that creates a real problem for me.
Okay, now, first of all, it makes it sound like you have to produce a birth certificate to vote, which is not the case, as we just laid out. It's to register to vote. But, of course, the rejoinder to Senator Warren would be, well, wait a second. Is it a problem for you that women currently have to produce that birth certificate when they go to get a job? Because that's currently federal law, Senator Warren. Surely you know that, don't you?
Well, isn't that just one of the first steps in getting married is getting a new ID?
Actually, it's not getting a new birth certificate.
Well, the question wasn't to get a new birth certificate. It was to get a new ID. And by the way, how does a married woman get a passport? When you go to get a passport, you have to prove that you are who you say you are and that you're a U.S. citizen. But if you're married, oh my gosh, it's impossible. No, it's not. We've been doing this for a century, let's say, since the advent of the passports that we use now. If your birth certificate has your maiden name and you're married, come on, help me out, guys. What do you produce? Ladies, you know the answer. Your marriage certificate. Yes. And she knows that. She's not stupid.
Because part of what the SAVE Act does is it says most driver's licenses around the country won't work as an ID. And that creates a terrible problem.
But you need an ID to do just about anything in America. Shouldn't you need one to
You
vote
don't need
in
a
elections?
birth certificate. I hope you know that.
Oh, so patronizing, so condescending, and such a liar. Because all they've got is lies. It's truly all they've got. Which brings us to Andy Beshear, another one of the normies. North Carolina governor. Oh, we love the normies. They're not crazy. They're not radical. They're not Zohran Mamdani. They're not AOC. They're not Gavin Newsom or J.B. Pritzker. No. They're normal. After all, they got elected statewide in a red southern state, so they're normal, right? Okay, Andy Beshear, who wants to be president, which means, of course, now he's got to sort of pretend to be normal, but at the same time appeal to the women at that table and the people who fund Democrat campaigns who are not normal, and the people who turn out for Democrat primaries who are not normal. So let's see how Governor Beshear does, being a normie, but appealing to the not very normies.
The White House has been pushing the SAVE Act, which would require citizens to show documents like a passport or a birth certificate to register to vote. Voter ID is something that a large majority of Americans support. Kentucky does require voters to show an ID for federal and state elections. Where do you fall on the SAVE Act specifically?
Well, I consider myself pragmatic. You know, I think that we can agree that election security is an important thing. But when you create policies that are so onerous, you push people out who have the right to vote, who should be able to register. And so I think on any policy, you got to look at what's reasonable. What is a form of ID that the vast majority of Americans have or can secure? What are your policies that are going to make sure that those that don't have that form can get it and can get it easily? I think we look at what do we want the end game to be? I think it's everyone who has the right to vote being able to vote. Yeah. And how do we form our policies around that?
Okay, but can you answer the question, please? We all agree. Everybody who has the right to vote should be able to vote. Okay, but how do you prove that they are who they say they are? And how do you prove that they have the right to vote? Could you answer the question, please, Governor? The question was the SAVE Act, which, by the way, does exactly what you just said you want to do, which is ensure that everyone who has the right to vote can vote, but also verifies that anyone who's registering to vote has the right to vote. Because if somebody who doesn't have the right to vote votes, well, that cancels out the vote of someone who does have the right to vote. Answer the question. He didn't answer the question. But he's a normie. I said North Carolina, by the way. I meant Kentucky, and I apologize for that. Thank you. Correcting the error, unlike George Stephanopoulos. Then he really wanted to prove how normie he was when it comes to LGBTQ issues, right? But again, understand something. He needs to appeal to the women in that room. He needs to appeal to the George Soros types in Human Rights Campaign and the people who really, really, really want children to change their sex. So how does he do it? Because he's a normie after all. Okay, normie, good luck.
But we rarely talk about the why. People want to know what drives us, especially in a world with social media where everyone's looking for the next authentic thing. For me, that's my faith. Most of the decisions I make are based on that golden rule that says we love our neighbor as ourselves, and that parable of the Good Samaritan that says everyone is our neighbor. Yeah. And so when I've taken actions like vetoing the nastiest piece of anti-LGBTQ legislation that ever came through my state, I described it in those terms. I said my faith teaches me that all children are children of God. Yeah. And I didn't want people picking on those kids.
Yeah.
Wow. Just so you know, the legislation that he vetoed, that he just characterized as picking on kids, that legislation would have prohibited people in that state from castrating perfectly healthy young boys or lopping off the perfectly healthy breasts of young underage girls, or prescribing very powerful prescription drugs to those boys and girls to chemically castrate them and keep them from developing through puberty as boys and girls. Governor Beshear, not only as a normie, just characterized those ideas as stopping those procedures as picking on kids. I don't know, maybe it's me. I think that encouraging young boys and girls to permanently mutilate their bodies is sort of picking on them. Kind of worse than picking on them, actually, if you think about it, Governor Beshear. Not only did he characterize the prohibition against those procedures as picking on kids, but he also wrapped his radical, pro-trans, anti-science agenda in the Bible, because only a true Christian would support chemically castrating children and letting them identify as the opposite sex. Because, I mean, it's right there. The Sermon on the Mount or something. I don't think the Democrats have any normies left. Well, there may be a few of them, but they call themselves Republicans now.